Hello everybody and happy Friday to all once again. I am doing exercise 7.3, so this is my third and last array exercise. Unless anybody has a request for me to continue doing arrays, the idea is to move on to the collections hierarchy in Java because it's more complicated and there are methods and more complicated rules involved in solving those types of data structures. But for now, I will do 7.3. I'll put a link to this problem in the description of this video. So let's take a look. It says write a method called countInRange that accepts an array of integers, a minimum value and a maximum value as parameters, and returns the count of how many elements from the array fall between the minimum and maximum, inclusive. They give us an example array with values 14, 1, 22, so on and so forth. There are 4 elements whose values fall between 4 and 17. So the idea is, for this example that they give us, a method call would be countInRange. They would pass in the array of integers as the first parameter, the minimum value of 4 and 17. And it would return 4 because this method is asking us to return how many times we find an element in the array that fall between the range inclusively. So what we start off with is, after we get the idea, the picture, we create the method signature. So it's going to be a public static method. It should be able to accept a non-static. A class instantiated method should be just fine, as long as it returns an integer, because you need to know what the method is returning. That's very important. The name is countInRange, and the parameters are an integer array, and I like to call it ARR, a minimum value, and a maximum value. So that's our method signature. So now that we got the easy part out of the way, we need to know what it's asking. So we know it's returning how many times we can find an element in our array that fall between these values inclusively. So what I'll have to do is declare a variable. I'm going to name it count. You can be more explicit if you desire, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. I'll tell you why in a bit, why I not only declare it but assign it the value of 0. It'll make more sense after I do this loop. And since we need to count how many times an occurrence of an element is equal to a value between this range, we need to loop through the entire array. So how we do that, we start from the very first element. We set I equal to 0. This variable is declared inside the for loop. That's the scope. And we set it less than the last value, or the last element of the array. And then we increment the value of 1. So the condition is we will find an element that's within these values, which is a minimum and maximum. So if we find a value at element I that is greater than or equal to minimum, and that value is also less than or equal to maximum, then we increment the value of count. And I'm going to tell you 2 things. The reason why I set it equal to 0 is because this expression would result in an error if we haven't already declared it to 0 previously. If we declared it to anything other than 0, then we would have a logical error because we need to return how many times this occurrence happens. And if we start from -1, then we'll get a count that is actually 1 less than the desired result. So that's why I specifically set it to 0. If I didn't set it to anything and just said in count, yes, Java understands that I declared a variable named count, but this expression would result in an error because it doesn't know when to increment. And the reason why I'm using the AND operator instead of the OR operator looks like this, if you forgot, is because if I set it to OR, then either of these conditions has to be true in order to increment count, and that's a logical error. It needs to fall between this range. If this was OR, then we can have a value that it's greater than or equal to minimum, let's say 4, but it doesn't have to be less than or equal to max. We could have returned the value 20. Yes, it's greater than or equal to minimum, but it falls outside of the range. So that would be a logical error. So we need the AND operator, which explicitly states that both both of these conditions have to be true in order to increment the value of count. After that's done, we return the value of count. And we are able to increment the value of count because the variable is within scope of the entire method. This value I, this counter variable, is only within the scope of the for loop. So that's some information about variable scopes, and let's hit that submit button. And there's that beautiful sound bit. So what we learned is a little bit about variable scopes, how to translate a problem into Java code. That's the idea of these exercises. And pretty much just conditional statements and being explicit. We're looking for certain values and we have to set boundaries for those values. And if there are any confusions or more optimal solutions to this exercise, please leave a comment. Like I said, I'm going to move on to array lists and other collection types soon. But I hope you guys found this helpful. I'll put a link to this exercise in the description. I advise you all to try it your own way without my code. The idea is just for me to explain my thought process and hopefully aid you guys in understanding how to translate English to code. Have a wonderful Friday. Goodbye.